So you'll notice here that the overview has our big money, like we talked about with our signal word. And would you please read the essential question with me? Ready, begin. What factors, I'm going to ask you again, please read with me. Ready, begin. What factors cause economic growth and what factors cause economic downturns in our country? Hey, this is kind of the reason that we care, is when there is economic growth, hopefully that's going to affect us positively. If there's an economic downturn, we need to protect ourselves when it comes to our money, and it might affect us negatively. It's good to know how these things are going to happen and how we're going to come out of those two different situations. So we're going to do a little bit of review of what we've already looked at. Okay, we're going to start here with GDP. Would you please go ahead and write over the top of that GDP? I'm going to get a little closer in here. It might be a little too close. There we go. Okay, so we're going to focus here. Okay, GDP, what does it stand for? Tell me. Gross domestic product. We're going to go ahead and underline that so we remember that the GDP is a gross domestic product. That might be the way that people talk about it. But as you know, in English, we like to be a little bit lazy and just use quick ways of saying things. So we're going to abbreviate it GDP or whatever abbreviations we possibly can. That's just the shortcuts that we love using. Okay, it's going to measure how much money a country makes per year. So there's our definition of a GDP. Okay, remember that we have an equation to use if we're trying to figure out the GDP. So we're going to write this underneath, and we're going to look at the clues here to help us fill in our equation. Okay, so the GDP is equal to C, consumer spending. Say that with me. Consumer spending. We're going to add a C right here. Plus, okay, and the next one in our list is investments. Say that with me. Investments. This is reminding you, hopefully, of what you already learned about the GDP. Okay, we're going to add that to our equation. And our next item in the list, government spending. Say that with me. Government spending. I'm going to add that to my equation also. And lastly, the exports. And I'm actually going to underline the EX. And then in my equation, I'm going to write the letter X. And I'm also going to put this little N down here to remind me that this is actually the net exports. So I have to remember that it's the exports minus the imports is our net exports. Okay. So to give you some idea about the GDP, here's a couple of examples we're going to write in. Okay. We're going to look at the United States. I don't know if you know or not, but the United States has the biggest GDP in the world. We're also going to look at China, and as I mentioned before, we are often competing with China. And we're also going to look at Mexico, just to know about our neighbor to the south. Okay, so we're going to use dollar signs because we are going to be comparing this with US dollars. Okay, the United States last year, our GDP was $29.7 trillion. I'm just going to write out trillion so that I don't have to figure out how many zeros that is right now. Okay, China was at $18.7 trillion. It's a lot of money in this world. Okay, Mexico was at $4 trillion. Okay. We're going to switch over now to our orange marker. So grab your orange. Remember, these color codings are going to come in handy because we're going to apply these to our business cycle that you guys are starting to learn about in day 4 today. So keep up with me with the color changes, please. Okay, I bought those markers just for you guys. We're going to start with a review here of inflation. Say that with me, inflation. So remember that we're repeating those words helps your brain to remember. So please do repeat with me when I'm talking about it. Okay, inflation is how our prices go up or down. So there's a quick little definition there for you. And then some information that you might remember. We take 300 of the commonly purchased goods. For example, our poor egg that has risen in cost. You might remember eggflation. Okay, once upon a time, this might have cost me $6 a dozen. However, because of inflation, our eggs are now going up to about $9 a dozen. Yeah. Okay. Just a little reminder in your brain. Okay, and that is one of the items that will end up on this list of 300 commonly purchased goods. That list is called the CPI. There's that abbreviation we love to use in English again. And it is the Consumer Price Index. Say that with me. Consumer, try it out please. Consumer Price Index. Okay. Now, our inflation rate currently, people are always talking about how high prices are. It's actually not very high. Our inflation rate right now, well, I should say in February, so I'm going to put that here in parentheses. This is from February, but that's not very long ago. The inflation rate was at 2.8%. And remember that inflation in 1 year, if it's around 3%, we're fine. That's a normal cost of living adjustment and inflation rate. So yes, prices are high, but that's kind of just because that's the way life goes forever and ever and ever. Prices will continue to go up. The problem is when wages don't continue to go up and our dollars can't buy what we want. Okay? Some reminders here about what causes inflation to rise, because this is the problem for us. Okay? And there are 3 things we're going to write about here. Okay, so one is not very common, but it has happened in some places where too much money is printed by the government. Too much money printed. That is a possible reason for inflation. There's too much money circulating around, and it's, I would say, more common in the times when people used cash money. Like now we just use our cards and it's like bam, 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 right? But there are still a lot of countries that will use cash and coins. And it's not like we don't use them here. Okay. Another reason for inflation to go up is that we have higher production costs. If it costs more money to produce something, for example, if somebody raises tariffs and it costs more to get the things you need to make your product, that might get passed on to the consumer in the inflation. Or it could be that the price just goes up because there's a higher demand. If the demand for something increases, that's another reason that the price may go up. So I'm going to say the demand increases prices, to be specific. Okay. And we're going to skip yellow and go to green right now. We will use our yellow in a second. But grab your green marker. We're going to do a quick review of unemployment. So I'm going to go ahead and remember that I'm talking about unemployment. Say that with me, please. Unemployment. Unemployment. Thank you. Okay. This is our measure of how many people don't have jobs, and specifically people who are looking for jobs, people in the labor force. Okay, we have 2 types of unemployment that are natural. these two, 1 and 2. So I'm going to label them off to the side over here, that this is natural. Natural. This is also what we would call full employment. So even if these unemployment pieces are in place, that's okay, that's normal, and we still call it full employment. That's if we have frictional unemployment, for example, the seasonal changes, or you just graduated and you're looking for a job, that's pretty normal and natural. And then we have our structural unemployment, and that one is more like if there's a robot that replaces a person. So if you are a person who, for your brain, images really work, maybe you want to draw a little picture of a robot here to remind yourself, you know, here's my little robot hands and my antenna on top of the head. I don't know. Whatever might help you to remember. Or, you know, structural unemployment are those old jobs. So if you want to write, like draw in an old wagon or something, or an old telephone operator kind of thing, something that might remind you what structural unemployment is, but that it's normal. Maybe you're going to draw a little picture of Santa to help you remember about our frictional unemployment. It's all about the seasons, or some of those natural things, okay? So one thing I do want to point out with our frictional and structural unemployment is that when that level is at about 4 to 6% of the labor force, that's okay. That's what we would normally expect. And so that's going to be okay. I'm going to put my little happy face there to remind me, not a problem. The problem can be when cyclical unemployment adds to that, and we get something that's greater than 6%. And these are the cyclical happens when the economy is going down, we're heading into a downturn, unemployment is rising, people can't buy the things they need to survive. So that's going to be our negative unemployment, and especially when it gets above 6%. Do you remember what it was right now, Ms. Manriquez? 4 point something.
2.2.
Yeah. So we're good right now. Remember that. We're starting okay right now.
Going up.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Important.
So we're going to take a quick 10 to 2 because I've been talking too long and you need to talk and process some of this. So what I'd like you to do is to have a partner. Did you already have AB partners figured out for groups? Is it one?
So if it's even, they're B, and if it's odd, they're A.
Okay. So you need to have an A-B partnership. And one of you, the A's, are going to review inflation. The B's are going to review unemployment. You're going to basically teach your partner those sections from here, okay? I'll give an example with GDP. If I had to teach the GDP, I'd kind of just tell what I remember from what we learned to my partner. GDP is the gross domestic product. You have to add up the consumer spending, the investments, the government spending, and the exports, like in this equation, to figure out what the GDP is. If I remember more, I might say that's something we measure every year to see how a country's economy is doing. Okay, so that's what you're going to do with your partner right now, but you're going to do it with inflation and unemployment. Okay, I'm going to pause my recording here. Okay, so we're going to get into what's called the business cycle. And I'd like you to first highlight this piece here that says the heart of macroeconomics. And for that reason, it's in the middle of your whole organizer because it is the heart. It is so important to the idea of macroeconomics that it used to be called like business cycle theory or something to that effect. And the business cycle is a representation of a measurement that we're taking, and we call it one business cycle. And that business cycle goes from over here, see where this little line starts? And it's going to span all the way over here and end here. And it goes from what we call one peak to another peak in our economy. Okay? And you'll see that our line is going to dip down because there are fluctuations. Fluctuations means up and down. Fluctuations in our economy. So peak, that's the highest, best part of our economy. We're not going to know it until it's already passed by. But it does exist. There are peaks for sure. And then it might dip down and go into some negative economic times. And we call the bottom of it a trough. Say that word with me, trough. I ask you to say it because the spelling is weird, right? If there's an O-U-G-H in an English word, you have no idea how it's pronounced unless somebody tells you. Because it could be uff, off, o, oo. All of those sounds make sense for O-U-G-H. So this is a trough. And we have peaks and troughs just like you maybe have studied in something else that has waves. The wave has a peak and the wave at the bottom has a trough. So it could be like ocean waves. It could also be temperature waves. It could also be sine waves that you're talking about in a mathematics class. There's all kinds of waves in life. And they've applied that representation for economics to show that our money is going up and down. As a country, you could even have this for one business, or you could even have it for your household economy. You have some peaks and troughs. So we have some stages. We're going to call them 4 stages. They're kind of hard to see the difference, okay? So we do have a peak. That's one stage of the business cycle. And then as it starts to go down, that's another stage. And when it's getting down here into this lower part, if it's starting to drop down, we're actually going to call that a recession. You've probably heard that word before. Say it with me. Recession. Recession. Okay, a recession is going to be an economic downturn, probably lasting for about 6 months. So I put that information on here for you. Okay, and during that recession, we're going to hit the trough, the bottom of it. Okay, and the trough is another phase in the business cycle. Just being down there at the bottom is one phase. And then we're going to have this recovery phase over here. So say that with me, recovery. Okay, and that's the section over here that is going to go back towards a peak because, hey, we want to be at the peak. That would be awesome. But realistically, because there's ups and downs, what we're really trying to get to, grab your red pen, please. What we're really trying to get to is a state of equilibrium. Remember the word, equilibrium. So we're going to add that here. And equilibrium is represented on this with this kind of average line of the ups and downs. So please color that with red also. This equilibrium is where we have a balance. We're not getting up into inflation or even the terrible, terrible hyperinflation that we want to avoid. And we're also not going down into a recession or the terrible, terrible depression that we also want to avoid. Okay, so we're trying to reach a balance. It's actually the government's responsibility to try to keep a balance in our economy. And I'll talk about the 2 branches of government that do that for us when we get to the second half of our organizer. But that balance gives us stability. We really don't want this line going up, down, like a heartbeat, right? We want it to be more stable, and the more stable it is, the better. However, it would be awesome if it was a stable line that was also going upward, right? Because that would mean that we're growing our economy. So yes, we want it to go up, but we want it to stay stable where there's not a lot of inflation and not a lot of recession or depression activity. Okay, I do want to talk about this line here, the equilibrium line. That is measured by our GDP. So I'm going to draw an arrow from our GDP down here to this line. Please draw that arrow on your graphic organizer also. And we're going to label this real GDP. Remember that the real GDP is the one that accounts for inflation. Oops, GDP. There we go. And I'm going to get a little bit closer here so you can see that part. Okay. And you have that. Please grab your orange marker because we're going to look at how inflation looks in the business cycle. Okay. So I'm actually going to show where inflation is. It does happen at our peak. Okay. At our peak, when our economy is doing well, there's inflation actually. So I'm going to label it here, and I'm also going to label it over at my other peak over here. Okay, these are inflation, and they actually have a word for it. This kind of gap that goes from the equilibrium up to a high inflation point. It's not too high yet. We're not in hyperinflation. We call that an inflationary gap. Inflation, so you put that word and then add airy at the end, A-R-Y, gap. And a gap is just like a distance between two things. And so the distance here is between our equilibrium point, where we're really balanced, and up to that peak of inflation. Okay, and I'm going to label, since I don't want to label inflation, I'm just going to draw an arrow, and you can do the same so that you don't have to write a lot of words. We're just going to put an arrow here. Okay, that's inflation. We're going to put an arrow over here. Yep, that's inflation, and then we don't have to write it. Okay, and our last thing is that we're going to look at how unemployment looks on the business cycle. So grab your green marker. Again, we're trying to keep these things straight in our brain, so it's helpful to have different colors. You, of course, could do this graphic organizer with all pencil or all pen, but then when you look back at it, you may not remember how all of the pieces go together in the business cycle. So unemployment is going to show up, just like inflation showed up in our peaks, unemployment is going to show up in our trough down here. So I'm going to make another little measurement piece here. And I'm going to draw a line from unemployment here so that I don't have to draw it out or write it out. Okay, this is our unemployment line. When unemployment is growing, that's usually in the negative times in our economic cycles. So when we're down here at the trough is when we have our highest amount of unemployment. And remember that this line of equilibrium, this is where we're going to find full employment. Those natural unemployment pieces where somebody graduates, they're looking for a job, there's a seasonal change, there's a job that, stops even being something that we use anymore because of technology, or they're replaced by robots. That happens. Okay, and then this also opens a gap from full employment at that equilibrium point down to the heavy unemployment in the trough. And this gap also has a name in economics. They call this the recessionary gap. So I'm going to put that in here. So recession, that word is here on here for you if you need the spelling. And then we're going to add ARY at the end to say recessionary. Okay, and I'm describing what kind of gap that is. So that's my adjective. Okay, and I'm going to get a little closer so you can see what I've done here. So we've got our full employment line, the unemployment getting really bad, and this gap that opens from the equilibrium point becomes the recessionary gap. Okay. So this is a preview of what you're going to see today with Ms. Manriquez. But before we go into slides, we're going to do another 10 to 2. And this time, your A partner is going to describe the yellow and red pieces. And your B partner is going to describe the orange and green pieces. Okay? So, please, again, get with your AB partner when I say the signal word.